All right, another week. Well, tonight I'm not going to say I was listening to one of the previous recordings. It's a bad habit. I will try not to do that. Anyway, that's probably another word I say too often. Personal loans. We're going to talk about loans. We're going to talk about mortgages as well. As we've said, personal loans. You can get yourself well, there's good reasons to take personal loans in some cases, but there's a lot of times where things are not going well. And anyway, everybody's got different circumstances, and I think I just said it. But things like medical situations or something like that, you may actually end up in this sort of situation. But to look at the classical going to some sort of finance lending place to get money for day-to-day expenses. If you've got a good plan, you shouldn't find yourself in that sort of situation. You should be able to have a bit of an emergency plan, a bit of a cushion. And like I say, I borrow money continually, but I borrow it from myself from my retirement accounts, which is a good way to do it if you get to that point. And it doesn't take much. Typically, like I say, you can borrow up to 50% of the amount you have in there. So once you start building up an account, that's not a bad way to go, because it doesn't involve a bunch of paperwork, and it doesn't involve an approval process, and it doesn't involve high interest rates, and it's just my preferred method. So sometimes, a large purchase. So this could be perhaps for a vehicle, which is quite common. Where you can get these loans, sure, all the different types of banks. And like we said, they're all kind of intermingled, integrated. This one on the end, the finance companies, those might not be as favorable of rates. They might be the the lender of pardon me, last resort for you. Family members, sure, you can do that, but be careful and obviously, but if you have that opportunity and don't trash the friendship, that would be one way to go. Peer to peer, these people they're out there. For some of the business lending, it does happen. There's all these different Kabbage, I think, Kabbage with a K, and all these different things. If you ever start up a new business or have a business license or have something that's incorporated, these people bombard you with stuff. And for wanting to invest in these type of companies, you may find yourself on the other side of these loans. And it's not necessarily a bad way to go. What they do is, through a lot of automation and a lot of software and a lot of smart people, you give them, say, $10,000, and they have all these people on the other side who are looking for loans, and you end up loaning money to these folks, but very small amounts. So you give $10,000, but you're spread out over maybe a couple thousand loans. So your exposure in each one of these loans is quite small. So again, it's a concept of diversification where all your eggs aren't in one basket, and there is going to be a high default rate in new business ventures, but you're going to be spread across so many loans with small exposures over several loans. So that's how it's supposed to work for you. Lending Club, Prosper, I think these things are going to change over time. Somebody may become dominant in there, but it's an interesting thing, kind of a buzzword. But $1 billion a year, so peer to peer, it's I just did it. It's yeah, it takes from Pirate Bay, sort of Napster back was the old thing, where it uses individuals, and it's sort of a crowdfunding type thing. Small loans, micro loans, perhaps 1,000 to 35,000. Credit report and FICO score, so those are always going to be important. Loan is sensible. That's the whole point. Are you living within your means? If you're living within your means and you need to take out a loan for, some event, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you're not living within your means, if you're being overwhelmed by debt and you're going to borrow more money to take care of that debt, that's not a good sign. Now, I've talked about before, if you have some high interest loans out there, consolidating those into some sort of secured loan or some sort of loan that has a lower interest rate, that's perfectly logical and probably encouraged by the credit card companies as well. So they may be happy to help you out with that situation. So that's not taking on new debt, that's restructuring your old debt. So loan process. So some of these forms that we talked about before are useful. The contract, the amount of the loan, the interest rate. Yep, it's all got to be specified. But if you anymore, you're typically going to be using some sort of proprietary form offered by the institution that you're trying to get the loan. But if you already have all these amounts in a balance sheet or a cash flow statement, that may help you out because you'll have ready access to the numbers and also know kind of where you stand, whether this is smart to be taking on more debt. Loan repayment schedule and amortization. Amortize, you'll see this word a lot in finance, and it's just the whole series of equal payments. So when they look at an amortization schedule, an amortization chart, it just means the series of payments and how those are going to pay off the loan. And principal and interest. So principal is the part, let's say you borrow $10,000. The part that's actually paying off that $10,000, that's the principal. And the interest is the rent you're paying to use that money. It's the shorter the term of the loan, these numbers are not that significant. But on a 30-year mortgage, something like that, the principal and interest change greatly over the course of the loan. In fact, the first couple of years on a 30-year mortgage, for example, you're paying almost no principal. You're paying primarily interest. And then towards the very end of the loan, you're paying just about all principal, and the interest is down quite a bit. So since that interest is tax deductible, you will hear people saying, well, maybe I'm going to refinance, or maybe I want another loan because they want that tax deductible interest. Anyway, it's still a cost that's borne by you, but it does give you something to write off. So it gets more involved in terms of a tax strategy. This is the U.S. method. I was under the French method at one point when I was in Europe, and they do a more balanced principal and interest. But we're not in France, so we'll concentrate on what's the norm in the States. Maturity, yep, the life of the loan, the duration. So you'll see this game played, and we'll look at the examples where, one of the reasons I do not have a new car. Last time I bought a new car was literally going on 22 years ago. I mean, I got a bunch of cars, and I've always got different ones, but just the whole car purchase process, it just infuriates me, especially when you go there and they say, "Well, what do you want your monthly payment to be?" Like, it's just insulting. They're implying you can't do math, and you say, "Well, I want a payment of $400, $500, whatever per month." They'll go ahead and not worry about the price. They'll just go ahead and make the duration of the loan long enough to get you down to your desired payment, which is kind of silly. Let's say they take it out to 7 years or something like that. Well, by the time 7 years, that car's kind of probably worn out. It probably has significant maintenance costs in addition to the price. So you may not mind paying that $500 a month for that car when it's brand new, but now that it's quite a bit older, you're probably not so interested. So anyway, I'm sometimes, sometimes they make incentives with the loans, but usually it's best to it's always best to have competitive financing where you go to a bank or something like that, your credit union, and you get their best offer in terms of an interest rate and a payment schedule, and then you compare it to what the dealership is offering. Now, what you have to be careful with is sometimes you may not want to tell the dealership right off, because if they think, they may come down, say, in the purchase price or something like that, because they think, oh, this person's going to finance it and we're going to make our money on the financing charges. If they realize you're a cash buyer, they may not be as interested because they know that that's not where the money's going to be made. Dealerships now make so much money out of the service arrangements and all that after, and some of these dealerships, not to single any car dealers out, but Subaru, we had when I was working with the military, we had a Canadian officer, and he took his car and it was all covered, it was a brand new car, bumper to bumper warranty, and had a flat tire, road, hit something, and they told him, oh, all four tires needed to be changed because it was some sort of harmony with the car. I mean, it wasn't really a valid reason, as the car was just not that old. If you go to a normal tire shop and you have one tire that's bad, especially due to a road hazard type thing where you've hit something, they're not going to insist that you change all four tires, but they'd always nickel and dime them. Oh, your wipers were unsafe. Your cabin air filter it was transparent what they were doing. So anyway, another reason why I don't like dealerships, but we'll talk more about that. Okay, collateral. So we talked about collateral before. Secured loans versus unsecured loans. So secured means they've got something that they can repossess, and so typically the interest is going to be quite a bit lower. Unsecured, not backed by collateral. So typically you want the secured loan because it's going to be cheaper, because the lender is exposed to less risk. You want the lender, the more risk the lender's exposed to, the more he's going to pass it on. Anything that's passed on as that comes up as an expense by a business, they just pass it on. So you're not fooling anybody or whatever when they say, oh, we need to tax this corporation, we need to do that. And believe me, I'm not a shill for these corporations, but these corporations will, if you make it more expensive for them to operate, those costs just get passed on to the ultimate consumer. Co-signing, for the most part, don't do it. The problem with being a co-signer, let's say you are doing pretty well and somebody comes to you and they say, hey, can you co-sign this loan for me? if they're that good a friend, maybe just lend them some money directly or do something. But if you co-sign a loan for them, there's a couple things that have happened. One, they needed a co-signer, so they probably don't have the credit. They probably don't have the means to repay the loan. So they need somebody like yourself who does have credit to step in and help them. So essentially, you're enabling these folks to get a loan that they probably shouldn't have, at least in the judgment of the lender. Now, what happens is, let's say things go horribly wrong and this person doesn't pay the loan. Are you going to know about it? Probably not. Once this thing goes into default, and let's say it gets even worse, pardon me, it gets sold off to some, collection agency. Is the collection agency going to go back to your friend, the original person who took out the loan? No way. That person, they needed a cosigner. They don't have deep pockets. It's kind of a waste of time. Time is money for these guys. They want to collect the money and get, back in business. So that's why they're going to come straight to you. And they're going to come straight to you probably with no notice. This person who's defaulting on the loan is probably getting all sorts of warning notices. You didn't have, insight into any of this. You just find out after it's too late, after the thing's gone to collection. So it's just not a good thing. And you, by being the co-signer, you are on the hook for that loan. You signed for the loan. So, like I say, they're probably going to not even waste their time with the originator of the loan, and you would have been better off, if you got to do something like that, just loaning them some money to your friend to help them through that situation rather than being part of a loan that you probably don't want to be part of. All right, loan applications, it's not going to be a form. Again, it's going to be something, online or maybe done in the bank, but the basic gist is there. What the loan's for, all your details. They may want some little mini balance sheet here, assets and liabilities. APR, we talked about that before, where that's just the standard. It's a legal requirement to use APR on the actual loan paperwork. There may be some confusing rates that are advertised, but typically you'll see somewhere on the form where it's quoted in APR, and it gets back to the truth in lending type stuff that's been around for many years. So sometimes too there's different fees. I buy a lot of equipment, and it's a reputable company, a big Canadian company that does most of the auctions, but they're kind of scammers when it comes to their loans because they have all sorts of origination fees. So their interest rates are not bad, but it's these other expenses that kind of kick in. The other problem with these guys, why I don't use them, is because there's prepayment penalties. Let's say you take out a loan for $100,000, but you are just using it to buy the piece of equipment in this case, or a vehicle or something. Hopefully you're not spending $100,000 on a car. But anyway, if you want to pay that thing off early, the bank, and I ran into this in Germany with a house I was paying off, where they, and if it's written in the contract, you're obligated to do it, but they have a prepayment penalty. And so let's say you just want to pay off the house or pay off the vehicle early, they think that that's not quite fair to them because they say you're obligated to pay interest for a certain number of years, and that's income they're already counting on, and the fact that you paid it off quicker means that they were denied that money. Anyway, it's kind of a scam in my mind, where other loans, again, you have to read the fine print, don't have a prepayment penalty, so you pay it off in one lump sum. But I had a home in Germany. I wanted to pay it off a couple years early, and I not only had to pay the amount I owed, but a little something extra that equated to the interest they would have gotten. So, kind of a scam. That happens here in the States as well. Interest rates on personal loans. So, this isn't that graphic in terms of an example, but it does show that there's more interest paid at first and less principal. The total amount that's paid, the monthly payment of $177, that stays constant, but the underlying interest and principal, and you can see by the end, and this is only over 12 months, by the end only $1.76 goes to interest and quite a bit goes to the principal. But as we expand those numbers, it's much, much more. So car loans are one big area where personal loans take effect. So when I talk about good loans and bad loans, car loans are a bad one. There's just no getting around it. Now, they're a necessary evil, especially up here in the winter. I realize some of you have kids and all that kind of stuff, and you can't be driving a beater, but try to get by with what you can, because the what makes a loan bad in my mind is, number one, you're loaning money, you're borrowing money to pay onto an asset that's depreciating, and it's depreciating like a rock. You know, the salvage value, the resale value of your car is just the minute you drive it off the lot, it depreciates a bunch, and then it continues downhill, and you're underwater most of the time, meaning the car is worth less than the amount you owe on it. So try not to do too much damage. The other thing about a car loan is, as opposed to mortgage, real estate, the interest you pay on your car loan is not deductible. The only interest that's deductible typically are some types of investments, but real estate within limits, personal real estate. But even investment real estate, there's other ways to deduct that. But anyway, any sort of personal loan, that interest is not deductible. So, limited debt solution. Yeah, you can get a shorter term loan. There's all sorts of things you can do, but one of the best strategies is try to live within your means. Try not to be the person that is living in an apartment yet has a amazing car. Your priorities should be, I don't know, it depends on everybody's priorities, but I would much rather go home to a nice area, a nice piece of real estate in a beater with a heater. And especially in the winter up here, I have no desire to be washing a car or taking care of a car in the winter. If it starts and I'm in a hurry, I'm sorry, it's good enough. And I just drive it. Wait till a warm day to clean it. So, selecting the car, preferences. So, personal preferences are obviously going to drive a lot of it. And there are some things you can do. Certain vehicles definitely hold their value. I've had so many 4Runners. I've got another one right now, but old 4Runners are amazing. Toyota, good stuff. Any sort of truck typically will hold its value. The further you get away from luxury, the better off you are typically. If you get the really fancy Hummer type, Escalade type thing, those things tend to drop like a rock, as opposed to a more utilitarian type truck. But anyway, you're going to have your own preferences in there. Insurance can vary, certainly. Resale value, Edmunds, there's Kelley Blue Book, there's all these other things that are kind of useless here in Alaska. There's just not a big enough market, and it's a non-disclosure state, since we don't have sales tax that's charged on the vehicles for registration purposes. So if you're in a state like California or well, basically any other state, you buy a car, even a used car, you have to go in there when you do your registration and admit or provide documentation for how much that vehicle sold for. Well, the state, they'll sell that data. They'll sell it to Kelly. They'll sell it to whoever. It's not considered confidential. So these books can generate that sort of data fairly reliably based upon transaction data. Now, people do lie a little bit, but there are means now because the states will crack down. And anyway, they end up with pretty good data. Other things are repair expenses. That can certainly happen. Certain vehicles, some of the other whatever imports that maybe don't have the reputation of a Toyota can get up there. Financing rate can vary depending on the brand or certain brands. I know Subarus, for example. My daughter's got one. Great car, but they tend not to dicker with the price, but they also tend to have pretty good resale. Loan contracts. The insurance issue, that can, kind of coming back to that, I've had vehicles before. I had a Dodge Viper when I lived in Europe. It was one of my kind of extra fun cars. I always brought Corvettes over there. I had about 5 or 6 at different times because I'd just get them, drive them for a year or so, and then sell them to one of the Europeans. But the Viper I had for a couple, 3 years, but I could only afford liability insurance on it because the insurance on that, it was going to be around $13,000 per year to put full insurance on it, and it was a 94 Viper. Anyway, it was worth about 30 grand. So within 2 years, if I didn't crash it, I was money ahead on the insurance. There was no way I was going to spend over $1,000 a month. I was just fairly careful, and I didn't crash it, which was good. Took it on the Nürburgring and all the tracks and stuff, but never crashed it. So if you're in another state, maybe Kelley Blue Book, maybe some of these other things might work for you, but again, sort of the reasons I mentioned, you can't really get a good price on it. You do have other options too, and you do see people purchase cars in the lower 48 and bring them up. But again, on the shipping, you can spend as little as maybe $1,100-1,300 bringing a car up. I brought a huge flatbed up for $1,400, and it was a 1-ton dually whole bit, and but you'll see other people spend $3 or $4 grand on a simple vehicle. So you have to be careful with the shippers, or drive it yourself. So you can categorize vehicles based upon their resale, repair, service, and the insurance. Most of the time, if you're looking at a certain class of car, you're not going to see huge insurance things. Vipers were obviously, it did not have anything. It didn't even have anti-lock brakes. Didn't have obviously traction control. Had a ton of power. Was driven by complete morons, my fellow Viper drivers for the most part. I got a free trip to Italy one time. The Ferrari dealer in Saarbrücken, he said I was the first guy he ever met who had a Viper in Europe who didn't crash it. And so he took me down to a place called Maranello where they make the Ferraris. Anyway, great time if you ever get there. And the Ferrari or the Lamborghini place is within an hour, so you can go to that place as well. Anyway, negotiating the price. Maybe by phone. Most people are going to do this online now. Trade-in tactics. If you're trading something in, for the most part, you're better off selling it. I know it's a hassle, but it's the trade-in, the games they play, they'll give you a ton of money for your trade-in, but then they won't budge with the selling price of the other car you're getting. Or they'll give you nothing for the trade-in, but they'll come down on the price. And it's just a lot of trickery. The no-haggle dealers, they act like, oh, our prices are set, so you get the best deal. How's that work? I never haggle to get a higher price. The no-haggle business, that benefits the seller, not the buyer. Shop around and purchasing a car. Although, what is it, Carvana or a few of these guys have gone down hard. So, financing decisions. Again, consider the extent of the loan. If you're taking out a 5 or 6 year loan, you may be happy with that payment on that brand new car, but think about it, paying that much money for a beater, especially if you're going to put a ton of miles on it, it's probably not going to hold up, and it may be worn out before while you're still paying on it. So, 3, 4, 5 years, it can change the amount. So when they say, well, I want a $300 a month payment, that's my limit, they'll say, okay, we can do that. And they haven't changed the price at all. It's still $15,000, but they just extended out the duration. So be aware of that. Leasing, I don't think it's so popular. Some of you may have done it, may be doing it right now. Lower down payment, but typically doesn't work out financially. It is very attractive. You see some of the Beamers and some of the Mercedes, they're always pushing this. But it's a way to move a lot of their vehicles, but you just end up with sort of a long-term rental. And if you don't have a business that you're writing off the payments again, it's probably not advantageous to you. You don't own the car, obviously. You're still responsible. And if you mess it up, when you give it back to them, they're going to charge you. So, but they like it because you're always in a new car. You're always generating payments, and you have no equity. And so you start out from zero again. Selling cars can be a hassle, but I don't know. Right now, I guess Craigslist is kind of out of favor. Alaska's List is difficult to deal with, so a lot of things go on Facebook Marketplace. Can sort of work, but it can be a hassle. I completely understand. Student loans. This is interesting. So I don't know if you've seen in the news lately, but obviously there was the loan payoff kind of thing for the $10,000. Now a lot of that's been pulled back, and it'll probably all be pulled back, to tell you the truth. The ability of the president to do this by executive order, that's not something that's within the executive branch typically. So if it happens, it happens, but it's probably not going to happen. And it's more of an election year kind of thing. But we'll see. Typically defer till you're out of school, different types of loans. Sometimes it's tax deductible. The government owns these loans now. So it used to be private sector, but now it's a federal program. And the loan forgiveness. So right now I've got one of my daughters is going back to nursing school, and I'm telling her maybe take the student loans. She has the cash to pay for it, but if you take the student loans and you end up working, I remember in the military I only had a few $1,000s worth of student loans, but I never paid them off because that was one of the conditions of joining. That at a certain point they just had a blanket forgiveness. So I wasn't trying to dodge out of the loan, but if you find yourself in a certain profession, like being a teacher or perhaps a nurse, and you go teaching, what's deemed as a bad neighborhood or maybe out in the bush or something like that, you may find that that the loans are forgiven. I'm not saying to overdo the loans, but then again, you need to take advantage of what's out there for you. Home equity loans, these things are misused all the time. People will say, oh, I'm going to put a new roof and I'm going to take a loan against my home and the equity I have. So I bought the home for 200 grand, it's worth 300 grand, I got 100 in equity, and so I'm going to borrow against that, and since it's associated with a mortgage, it's going to be tax deductible, then I go buy a boat. Well, if the loan people show up and you don't have a roof but you've got a new boat, you may have a problem. If you've got both, then you're probably all right. But this is how it works. 80% of the equity in the home, typically. Anyway, that's in a market that's going up. So you may recently have noticed that maybe your home value is not quite what it was a few months ago, and that trend may continue for a while. Although real estate doesn't dump as much as, certainly not as much as the stock market. If the real estate market goes flat or drops by 5%, people just go in a tizzy. Now there are other markets. I mean, if you're in Miami or Phoenix or something like that, the super volatile markets, there can be a great deal of movement. And so the news, the mainstream media is going to concentrate on that. But someplace here in Alaska, it's probably just going to slow down a little bit. And people aren't going to be making offers above asking price and things like that. That's fine. Credit limits, so that's what we're talking about. Interest rate, typically variable. I've never taken out a home equity loan, but you could. So up to 100 grand is tax deductible. Payday loans. Okay, things have gone wrong here. You're dealing with not quite loan sharks, but pretty close. And there's a whole group of these type of things in here that some of them seem pretty reasonable or benevolent or something like that. Or like, let's say you see somebody who's going to prepare your taxes and they're going to give you an instant rebate. Well, the IRS doesn't work instantaneously, as I've mentioned before. I'm going on a number of years and these people owe me money. It's a significant amount of money, so they're going to review it, which is a polite word for audit. Fair enough. I haven't cheated, so they're going to take a little bit more time. But ultimately, I'm confident I'll get the money. Anyway, when those tax preparers offer you an instant refund, now what they're doing is they're making a loan on what they say is going to be your future refund. And so you're paying interest on that loan. So that's kind of a tricky thing they do. The payday loans, the cash title loans, you see them in different places. They have little workarounds to avoid the usury laws, the laws that limit how much interest they can charge, and they'll have it as a different type of fee, and somehow it ends up being over 100%, a year. So it can happen. So work hard to avoid that kind of stuff and have enough of a buffer where you're not at the payday loan type people. All right, so now we're moving on to loans that are for a positive reason. So like I said, the other loans were negative. These ones can be good. You're investing in an asset that's appreciating. The payments you're making, part of it is tax deductible, so you end up in a little bit better shape. There's going to be a rent versus buy decision that we'll talk a little bit about, but as we've talked about before from amortization schedules, the payments stay the same. So I remember when I was growing up, and this was obviously a long time ago, but my parents mortgage was $130 a month because it was over 30 years old. It was getting, I keep saying it was right there at the end. But the payments don't change. If you were renting that home, that payment would have been, I don't know, 1,500, 2,000, something like that, because rent is tied to inflation. So anyway, we'll talk more about rent versus buy. Typically, to buy a home, 10 to 20% down. There are, exceptions if you happen to have VA, if you served. Typically, fixed rate, 30 years. Those are the most common. Fixed as opposed to an adjustable rate, and 30 years. Typically, the period that most people look at. Then they've got sort of these rules of thumb, which it depends on where you're at. If you're living in, say, San Francisco, there's no way you're going to be able to pull this off. Home price should be no more than 2.5 times your annual gross household income. All the homes there are $1 million. How are you going to, are you making $400,000 a year? Probably not. Mortgage payment not exceed 28% of your gross. Some of these people are paying way in excess of that, double that. Monthly debt payments, including the mortgage, should not include. In a perfect world, that'd be great. So some of these numbers don't really matter too much. What you need to do, this whole thing could be summed up in pre-qualifying for a loan. Pick a mortgage banker, preferably a local one, because all the loans are going to get sold off anyway. If you go to Residential or Home State or whoever, what they do is they process stuff. They do all the credit reporting and make sure you're qualified and get the loan going and get the loan closed, which is all good. That's what you want to have happen. You want to buy this home. Then about a month later, you've just moved in your home, you get a letter in the mail, and it used to be typically from Wells Fargo, but they've sort of stepped back. Then it was Freedom, and anyway, there's a couple other mortgage companies out there that tend to just buy up all these loans. And for you as the homeowner, you really don't care. Not that you get a vote. It's not you. In the fine print, you signed all the paperwork saying they can sell that loan to whoever they want, and so they do. The local companies, they don't have those kind of resources. The reason why I say use somebody local as opposed to some sort of Quicken type thing or something like that is just from having sold real estate up here, it's just so much easier, and the propensity to have things close and not have issues at the last minute. There's some unique situations that happen in Alaska, and just even the time zone issues. You want somebody that you can talk to. You don't want to be in a phone queue or corresponding online sometimes. Deals tend to fall apart if there's not some personal input on the way of the mortgage banker to get the thing done. So, but when you go to them and you present all your documents, they'll be able to tell you what you qualify for. They'll be able to give you a price range. So, what's the market value of assets used for down payment? You also need to allow for closing costs. Those sorts of details the mortgage banker can help you out with. Most people have been renters, and then finally they get to the point where they're going to buy. So you know what your housing costs are. Obviously, in a house, it's going to be a little bit higher because you're just going to spend more on stuff. You're going to go to Home Depot and Lowe's and empty your wallet on garden hoses and fertilizers and all these other things that are going to just eat into the thing. Fair enough. It's part of owning a home, but it's a little bit more expensive. Typically, a mortgage, also the mortgage payment, they will have the taxes and the insurance included in the payment, and they're done through escrow accounts and all that sort of stuff. But the mortgage companies want it done that way so that they know that their asset is protected. They feel if you're, responsible for paying the insurance that might lapse at some point, and the same with the property taxes, they don't want the thing having a tax lien against their asset, because really it's still their home until you pay it off. So it's all about protecting them. Okay. People learned this in 2007, 2008, where they thought real estate, you absolutely couldn't lose. And it's people's homes. Of course they're going to pay on them. Those notes are perfect. What they didn't realize was there was people that they call ninjas, no income, no job, no assets, who were buying lots of homes. And it was sort of a victimless crime, they thought, because real estate always goes up. Well, it doesn't. So people now, the loan process got a little bit more difficult after that whole thing. But then sometimes there's pressure to open up more loans again. So don't be surprised if it loosens up. Huge investment? Yep. Decide on a price range. So rather than going out and shopping for homes and doing all this stuff, you need to do that pre-qualification bit. It'll typically cost you about $50 because they'll have you pay for the credit report. Now later on when you go to purchase the home, that's going to be a cost that would be paid by you anyway, and so it's just not charged then. But if you go and get pre-qualified and then you haven't decided how much you can afford, and again, it doesn't mean you have to spend that much money, but you know what your limits are. Because at a certain point, and I realize a lot of people know somebody in real estate, so they may go have a friend or somebody help them out. You can do that, but from being in that business just for the short time I was, there's a couple things that are universally true. There's a small percentage, and we're talking 2, 3, maybe on the outside 5% of the salespeople who do 95% of the business. And then there's that other 95% that are just not really in the game, and they're making maybe a little bit of money. But the real burners, the people that are very aggressive and live that, real estate, they're doing all the business. And that's probably the person you want, because they have the exposure, they're very serious about all of that. Well, if you go contact one of these people who's one of these high producers, and you're not pre-qualified, they're not really going to deal with you, because you've demonstrated that you're not super serious. They're not posting those kind of numbers, that kind of volume, by dragging people around and showing them houses that they don't know if they're qualified for. Let's say you find a home and then you start the loan process and you find out, you can afford more, or you can't even afford this one, or everybody's just wasted a whole lot of time. So the mark of a good agent is the agent that will not do anything with you until you're pre-qualified, because you're demonstrating a non-serious approach to this whole thing. So anyway, that's why you get the pre-qualification. Cost of mine, the cost of renting. But keep in mind, a couple things. You will spend more on the incidentals on the home, but that monthly payment will never change on the mortgage, whereas renting will be indexed with inflation. Consider a condominium. There's a lot of personal preference in this. Me personally, I'm not a huge fan of condominiums. I don't like it. But from a personal finance standpoint, where I really don't like it is because I was involved in a couple of these transactions where most of the condominium associations will have a specified maximum number of rental units within their condo, complex. And let's say you are in a, you're moving, you're in a bind, whatever, you want to sell this condo and the market's soft. You can't sell it. So you just say, well, screw that, I'll just rent instead. I'll rent this home. Well, you may not have that option because the condo association may say, oh no, we've already got 20-25% rentals. That's our limit. You don't have the option to rent. So you've given up a fair amount of financial freedom. And I'm not a big fan of HOAs, homeowners associations, either. They can be good in certain things, but a lot of times not. Anyway, a condo is like a homeowners association on steroids. So I'm not a fan of condos, but each to his own. On a condo, what you own is from the paint inside. So you don't actually own the walls. You don't own the structure. You don't own obviously the parking lot, the walkways, any of that kind of stuff, which is nice if you don't want to be doing maintenance on any of that. But because you've got all this communal living stuff going on, I just don't want anybody in my chili like that. But each to his own. Plus, pets would be a hassle. My dogs are being pretty nice tonight, though, actually. Relying on a real estate agent. So, for me, and again, there's some of these guys who are complete jerks, but I would still use an agent whenever I'm buying because you don't pay the commission. The seller pays the commission. So it costs you nothing when you're buying a house and you use an agent. Or up here in Alaska, they actually call them salespeople because agent was a term that somebody abused. And so Alaska, for a low population state, there's a fair amount of evil crime that's taken place. And so a lot of the real estate laws are written the way they are to address some of these bad actors who have been out there in the past. But again, real estate agent, salesperson, there's some good ones and there's some bad ones. There's a lot of reasons to have a good one up here, especially where you have avalanche zones and areas with no sunlight and just all sorts of weird type things. A good agent can help you and can assist you and can help you also in the pricing type thing, because generally I've never paid the asking price for anything, and so there's always this back and forth, and it is kind of nice to have somebody who you can kind of bounce those things off of to figure out, because if you come in too low, then you've insulted the people and they'll shut down and not want to deal with you. There's a certain sweet spot where you haven't insulted them and they'll agree to a lower price, or maybe they'll do something else. They'll agree to fix all these broken items, and sometimes those broken items don't get fixed, and so that just ends up being money that comes back to you. Depends what you can live with. Anyway, online realtor services, that's going to happen at some point, but it's not there yet. There are companies I've invested in from stock perspective. Right now, the 6% is the commission, but it's not. It can't be. It's an agreed to commission, but everybody plays ball with that. There's going to be some reduced commission people coming here, but there's great resistance, obviously, from the people who are getting 6%. So at a certain point, real estate may go, the way of bank tellers to ATMs or travel agents to online booking, but it's not quite there yet. And a lot of times the online things like Zillow and stuff, their information is typically not reliable. Criteria. So what you need to think about is you need to, especially for a home, your first home, is it going to be part of your wealth building process here? Is it going to be basically a future rental home? And so let's say, well, I don't have kids, so I don't care about the schools. Well, yeah, you do care about the schools because it's going to affect the purchase price. It's going to affect the desirability for future renters and all the rest of that. Maintenance. I'm totally a location driven person. I would rather have, in fact, I've got a home in Eagle River that's, it's certainly not a beater. It's a cool home, but they came in and they built this one home. They call it the Cabela's house. It is huge, and it's on 5 acres, and mine's only on 2. But I'm in a great spot because you don't want the nicest house in the neighborhood. You want one of the homes in the neighborhood that's going to get kind of drug higher by the nice homes around it. It's a good home, but it's not as new as the other ones, and it's not nearly as large. Taxes, depends where you are. If you're in the MOA, my God, because I've got a home, obviously the Eagle River home, and then I've also got stuff in the valley, and I've got just shy of 100 acres out here that I pay a whole lot less real estate tax on than I do on a 2 acre parcel in Eagle River. So go figure. Homeowners Association, yeah, nobody wants a big purple house, right next door to them. But then again, nobody wants somebody telling you that you can't have a trailer parked there, or you don't have enough trees and you've got moose actively eating the trees you do have, but you need to get 3 trees back up there or else you're going to start getting. Anyway, you got to kind of, maybe your real estate person can help you out here, what the feelings are towards the homeowners associations, and they can change over time. I do not have a homeowners association on this property, nor do we have one in the Eagle River home, which is unique. So anyway, resale value. Again, getting back to Eagle River, you'll notice that real estate prices kind of index up in Eagle River because you get military people in there on a 3-year tour, maybe a little bit longer, but they pay $300,000 for the thing, and they want to sell it for about $318 so they can get their money out of it plus pay the real estate commission. So it tends to put upward pressure on real estate prices, and then personal preferences. But there's a lot to be said about different locations. If something looks like a future slum, that's not a good thing. If something has some sort of waterfront or is on the edge of something or near a golf course or near something, a park or something that's going to keep it nice as opposed to being future slum, that's what I've always looked for. I'm much more of an area person. The home I can kind of work with. I've taken real estate people out, clients out, and they're concerned about the color of the drapes and things like that are completely changeable. But you can't change the fact that you're on a crummy street and anyway, it can be frustrating. And that's from being a salesperson and dealing with clients that are focused on, in my mind, on the wrong things. Market analysis. Don't get too wrapped up by the fact that your house appraised. They generally do appraise. The appraisal system's definitely biased. The appraiser knows how much you offered for the home. What the appraiser will try to do is he'll try to justify the price by finding comparable properties, and try to get the loan approved. I've not, in my experience, have I ever seen a home not meet the appraisal. So, and especially where it says based on price per square foot. So I just mentioned I have a 2-acre lot. The guy next door's got a 5-acre lot, and they're going to go price per square foot of the dwelling. So it's not, you can see where that's not quite right because it doesn't take into account the parcel size, the parcel desirability, the neighborhood, any of that. Just going price per square foot, not very useful. But they will try to do it. I mean, I had somebody tell me, oh, it's 155 per square foot. I don't even need to come look at your home. Well, perhaps you do. You can't just say that. You can't. The difference in construction, the age of the home, just doing it on square footage it's just not going to work. We all know what's going on with the economy. What's going on right now is interest rates are going up. So there's a lot of people that are being pushed out of the market. They can no longer afford to buy a home because the interest rate payments have gone up. So now there's fewer people in the market, and it's supply and demand. So prices will inch lower or stay flat since there's the supply and demand curve has changed. That's what they're trying to show here. So this is where we were. They can afford. Demand for homes is up. Short supply. Price of homes goes up. What we're looking at now, nobody has any confidence. Not a whole lot of demand. Supply, people are still moving. Price of homes go down. So depends on the area. In Alaska, I think we're all right. But other markets are probably going to get hit. But they also surged. Now, if you're buy high, sell low, that's not going to work. But for most of us, you'll be fine. Lessons from the crisis. All that really happened was the loan process got a little bit more difficult. And you do see a lot less in terms of some of the aggressive adjustable rate mortgages and other things like that. When it was assumed that real estate would only go one direction, there were some fairly aggressive loans out there, very aggressive loans. And now that it's recognized that real estate can not only go up, but it can also go down or sideways, people are less aggressive. Zoning can factor in. Zoning laws may affect desirability. So a lot of things can change. You know, there's a lot of homes right now. I hate to dwell on Eagle River, but there's a whole bunch of them that basically overlook the Glen Highway, a Powder Ridge kind of area. I can't imagine that being a good situation, but different people. Second opinion on your valuation. Well, I like brokers, but if they're on commission and they want to see the sale go through, they're going to agree. So now this was not true 6 months ago. It's probably true now. What happens though when you negotiate for a price? Let's say somebody's offering a house for $300,000, you offer them $290, and they deny it. Then you offer them, $300, the full price offer. They can reject that $300 because it's the whole thing started fresh again. Once you've made an offer that's less than their original price, their original price is no longer on the table. So you can lose. What you most often see is where you go just too low and the people, they don't think you're negotiating in good faith and they just sort of shut down, and now they're just going to sit back and wait for you to make a full price offer. So you can cost yourself money by doing that. Stipulations, yep. And there will be, negotiation on some of the closing costs or move out dates or home inspections or, things sold as is. So the down payment. Now, if you do a lower down payment, you can get in on that house still, but the mortgage company may insist upon you doing PMI, private mortgage insurance. And I actually did this on the first home we bought. We were in Las Vegas. I was flying F4s out of Nellis there, and the market was booming. And so getting into the market, getting in the house, that was a no-brainer because the market was ripping. It was going way up really fast. So we only had, I don't know, 10, 15% down. Went ahead and bought the home and started paying private mortgage insurance, which was maybe another, let's say it was about $150 a month in addition to our home payment, because our down payment was less than the desired amount. And this went on for maybe about 4 months or so. And then I went ahead and had the house reappraised, and it appraised for much more than much more than our the price that we had bought it for. So I could claim all that equity now as essentially a down payment and put that appraisal in there, and the PMI requirement went away, as did that payment. So I've done PMI before, and if it's a fast-moving market, but you wouldn't want to be paying this for a long-term type thing. But it's common. All the closing costs, and there's a accepted division of these. Oh, that's a seller's cost. That's a buyer's cost. The application fee, obviously, that's going to be on you. Points, not typically a thing. Points is a concept where, let's say a loan is going for, well, now it's probably about 6%. And let's say you actually want the loan for 5.5%. Well, you can pay a fee, a certain fee that's calculated, and get that 5.5% loan, but you have to pay for it. It's kind of odd, and it's not that often used, but you will hear people talking about people buying points. Loan origination fee, yeah, typically you can't get away from that. Appraisal fee, $200 to $500. Title search, home inspections, well and septic, yada yada yada. It ends up being about 10 grand for closing costs typically, maybe a little bit more now. Fixed rate mortgage, so stays the same, the entire rate. So if I was buying a home right now, I would probably still go with a fixed rate with the assumption that I'm going to refinance when rates go lower at some point. You could go with a variable interest rate, which is a much more aggressive position. It's going to be, say, a variable rate might be, or adjustable rate, an ARM, adjustable rate mortgage, might be down in the 4% type thing right now. But if interest rates go up, it could index and go higher. It's not going to be fixed. So it's kind of a gamble, a crapshoot. I bought a home in Germany. The one I bought there, I think my interest rate was 2.1%, and the prevailing rate was 4%, and mine was an adjustable, but it paid off. I was exposed to some risk because it could have gone up, but I had the resources to cover it because I was essentially, the mortgage was being paid for by my allowances, so I wasn't too worried about it. But anyway, it's definitely a gut check to get a adjustable rate mortgage, and they're not as common as they used to be. Typically not assumable. Assumable means you take over somebody else's loan, and especially if it's a loan for like 2.75%. The mortgage company's not going to be interested in that. They want to get rid of that loan in a hurry. They want you in at 6% or whatever the prevailing rate is. So amortization table, we talked about that before. We showed you the one from just that short interest thing. But here is a 30-year. So this is where it gets pretty dramatic. This person, so per 100,000, so $537. It's an amortization, right? Always the same from month 1 to month 360. Month 360 represents 360 months equals 30 years. So here, paying a whole, this is at the end of the loan, paying a ton of principal and $3 of interest. So your tax deductibility of this loan now is a whopping $3. Whereas when you're first taking out the loan, every month you've got $417 to deduct on your taxes. And you're only paying $120 towards that principal. So it changes over time and gradually changes. Yep. Goes without saying, the larger the mortgage, the larger the payment. Interest rate can be pretty dramatic. As it goes up, that rate skyrockets. The reason I take out a 30-year versus a 15 or something like that is because, again, make sure there's no prepayment penalty. But if you want to get a 30-year mortgage and pay it off in 15, then you do that. You do the math, figure out what it's going to take, and just make your normal payment plus some. And that plus sum is applied to the principal. And you can pay off a 30-year mortgage in 15 years without an issue. The advantage of this is, say, bad things happen, another COVID kind of thing, and you lose your job or something. You get in a tough spell. Well, if you've got a 15-year mortgage, you're going to have a much higher payment than you would if you had a 30-year mortgage. So you can always revert and just slow down. Rather than making nearly double payments every month, you can slow down and make just 30-year payments and then accelerate your payments again when you get back on your feet. So you just have more flexibility in my mind. So another example, this is per year now. So $5,000 worth of interest, $170 worth of interest. The payment stayed the same. One more chart just to make it abundantly. Yep. Life of the loan? Shouldn't it be life? Anyway. So you can kind of figure this out. So when you have whatever your mortgage rate is, keep in mind you're buying a home here. So your payment on this $180,000, say you found a home for $180,000 or something for that, your payment's not going to be this $966. Your payment's going to be that plus the escrow type thing. So the insurance and the taxes. So that's probably going to be about a $1,200 payment. So, but the nice thing is you don't get hit with a tax bill at the end of the year, and you don't have monthly insurance payments. It's all rolled in. So that's why they use some of these calculators, so that you do keep track. And you can also look at the things, but anyway. Bankrate.com's out there. In fact, we'll look at that in a second. So here's where the interest rate changes. So 4%, well, it used to be a good rate until it was down. I mean, we have phenomenally low rates. 2.75 is what one of my mortgages is. And so you can see just the impact. This is why there's less buyers in the market now. Is this person's mortgage was less than $500. Now, just with the interest rate change, it's quite a bit more money. So people that are right on the edge are now pushed out of the market. And you can see a 15-year mortgage, just because it's paid off 15 years, it's not double the payment to get the 15-year mortgage. It's going to be somewhat less because you're not paying interest as long, so the total amount of the loan is going to be a little less. but you could take this loan right here with a 477 payment, but go ahead and just start paying the bank 740 every month, and your mortgage would be done in the 15 years. Yep. So ARMs. Yep. Initial rate. Quite popular back in the day. They had balloon mortgages where you paid like interest only for a first couple of years, and then you had to come up with a big chunk at the end. And they had all these creative financing things, and they've kind of stepped back from a lot of those now that they've recognized real estate isn't always a sure thing. Typically tied to something, some national interest rate. All the loans I had like that were tied to the LIBOR, which was the London Interbank Rate. Here they'd be tied to something in the States, and they can go up, but maybe just 1% per year. But given a few years, you could turn your 3-4% loan into an 8-9% loan, and all of a sudden make it unaffordable to you. So the home versus rent. Yep. Tax advantages, certainly. But there's a lot to it, the ability to quickly, if you're not staying here and you don't have any desire to have rental property up here, renting may be the option. Plus, when you're still trying to size up neighborhoods or you're not quite sure where to go, real estate can be kind of an anchor. But if you're settled down, you're in an area, you're interested in building, a bit of a rental empire where you get a home. When you're buying a home, the interest rate, and we'll talk more about this at the end of the chapter, or at the end of the course, more in depth. But these interest rates are available to owner occupied, and sometimes they're even lower for first time buyers as sort of incentives. If you're buying something to buy as a rental, typically it's double the interest rate because it's now an investment property, and so the fees are going to be quite a bit higher. What you can do, though, is you can buy the home, live in it for a little while, get that good loan rate, and then move out of it, buy another home, again, as the owner-occupied, get that good rate, and you can keep doing that. They don't revise your loan just because you're not living in it anymore. You still continue with that original low owner-occupier rate. So that's why it's advantageous if you're building rental properties to have initially lived in them rather than financing them as investment properties from the get-go. So balloon payments, graduated payments, yeah, there was all sorts of creative things out there, but you don't even see them advertised much anymore. Interest only. Again, most of these people were flipping them. They'll just pay the interest. They'll sell the home before the couple of years expire, and bada bing. Refinancing. You do that. Typically, you talk to your lender, but the interest rate normally needs to drop about 1% or so to make it right. I had a couple loans. They weren't bad. They were 4%. But when interest rates started dropping, I refinanced. And then another one, I refinanced it again when it dropped even more. So, but you do pay some additional closing costs, which is the reason that it should drop a percentage before you do that. All right. So one thing I want to go to is, I don't know why I was looking at that. bank rate. And today's mortgage rates. So let's see where we're at. Now, they're from the get-go, they're already trying to sell me stuff. All I wanted were the rates. I don't want to... okay. See, they took me straight to offers. I'm not interested. And they used to be a site that you could just go straight to and get the rates you wanted. Now, that's why all these things kind of have a shelf life, an expiration date. They go from being a reasonable company to not as much. NerdWallet, they're just going to sell all my data to some third-party guy, but that's fine. So they're saying they can get it for 4%. That's on a refinance. Purchase. I thought they were getting higher than this. 4% is not necessarily bad, but let's look at something in Anchorage. So 4.5. Let's see if you got a crappy credit score. What's going to happen here? I don't know that you're going to get that. Anyhow, so these, let's see what the details are. What are the terms? Am I missing it? Okay. This week's 30-year fixed rate. 15-year fixed rate. So what do we have here? We've got some sort of advertisement from our... So these are some sort of creative process that's going to be an adjustable rate thing. And it almost worked. I'm going, man, I was wrong. I thought rates were 6%. Yes, they are 6%. So what we were looking at there were some sort of adjustable rate mortgages. So 5.44 for a 15-year because their money is at risk for half the time it is in a 30-year. They're making a forecast out here 30 years that this 6.29 is going to get them through that. The longer you forecast, the more risk involved. So that's why this interest rate is lower. These ones are probably an ARM, and they're probably, and this is also... Okay, and I'm looking at their NerdWallet rating when I thought it was like, I'm more of an idiot than I thought. Let's see what they got. Okay, we're just going to look at new. Single family. See, primary residence or income, the interest rates are going to be quite a bit higher as you get the secondary home or the investment property, certainly. Whatever. Now there may be some incentives. Let's just say average. I think most people are better though. If you're buying a home, you should be. Nah, I'm not doing that. Right. See, anyway, okay. So all I'm trying to do is get a rate, and I'm I'm getting frustrated is what I'm getting. So these were their ratings. Okay, these are their interest rates. Let's look at adjustable rate mortgages rates. Schwab. Again, right back to Rocket Mortgage. This alone is enough to work with a local lender. there's a lot of fluff in here, and we still haven't got to what we wanted. Okay, so here's an arm. 5.25. So, for me, I don't think I'm going to do that. That rate is not that much more attractive. 5.375 for another percentage, an extra 1% on the loan. I could get a fixed loan. So, anyway, sorry for wasting your time there for a couple minutes, but a lot of times these websites can be kind of a waste of time. Went a little long. I'll be putting out the homework assignment, or the total homework assignment, what's going to be due in the next week. It'll show up in the assignment section. That'll be a batch assignment, and you'll hand that in before the midterm. The midterm, I'll do the study guide for that. It'll be a fairly comprehensive review, and yeah, don't panic. It's all gonna work out. If you study the review and you've listened to these lectures, you'll do just fine.